Okay, good evening, everyone. Apologies for the late start. We had a couple of technical issues at the start there, but hopefully you can all now hear us. Firstly, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. It's great to see so many people on the call. We've got nearly 50 people on the call, so that's brilliant. Firstly, I hope you and your families are safe and well in these very strange times. By way of introductions, firstly, I'm Ben Thompson, Cricket Development Director. I'm joined by Simon Jones, Cricket Development Manager for the HCB, who I'm sure many of you will know. And I'm also very pleased to introduce Duncan Jenkinson, who is the ECB Facilities Planning Manager. In a second, I'm going to pass over to Duncan and Si, who will go through the emergency funding and support available to clubs and leagues. Now, tonight's webinar is the first of what may be a number of webinars during the lockdown period, but depending on how we go, it may influence how we communicate once we return to normal. So following the call, please provide any feedback you have, good or bad, to Si or myself. In terms of the agenda, Si, if we can click on one. Excellent, thank you. We envisage the call taking about 45 minutes or so, but that will depend on how many questions we have at the end. Duncan's going to take us through the first part of the webinar and outline the national and local funding support available, including government, Sport England and ECB funding. Si is then going to provide a snapshot of the current situation in Hampshire, and as I say, we'll finish up with questions at the end. Now, whilst you guys can't speak on the call, you can submit questions. So please use the Q&A function, which I believe is in the bottom right of your screens. Please don't wait until the end to submit your questions, though. Please submit them as we go through the content, and then I'll attempt to pull them together and ask our experts, Si and Duncan, at the end. So that's it from me for now. I'll now pass over to Duncan.
Thanks, Ben. Good evening, everybody. Just to introduce myself, I'm a Facilities Planning Manager for the ECB, covering the South Central and London regions at the moment, so quite a busy time. Usually my role is around supporting clubs to develop their facilities, whether that's pitches or pavilions, nets and so on, but clearly priority at the moment is to try and get support out in the short term to help clubs through this difficult period. So this evening I wanted to talk you through some guidance around emergency funding and support, the ECB schemes, which hopefully you've had a look at. There's also government supporting and support out there, and just some general tips and guidance to try and help you through this period. So to start with, as well as looking at, so I've just clicked through to the next one, thank you. As well as obviously looking at how you address the challenge of reduced income into your clubs, one of the key steps is to try and reduce expenditure during this challenging period. So we'd advise clubs to carefully review their finances and to consider their sort of short-term, longer-term risks and where they can look to resolve those as best possible. There's some very good guidance on the Sport England Club Matters website around helping clubs with that. Trying to reduce and defer rent, obviously that's the remit of your landlords, so having conversations with local authorities, private landlords, and seeing if they're willing to reduce or defer rent. In many cases that has been agreed to try and help clubs through. In terms of grounds, reducing maintenance of those. There's some very good guidance from the GMA, which was previously the IOG, around light touch maintenance of your grounds to make sure that if and when we can get back out to our clubs, you can quickly bring pitches back into use, but reducing the costs in the short term. Some clubs have had some joy regarding insurance in terms of business interruption, so certainly worth checking your insurance cover as well. And communication is something that Hampshire will talk about a lot more later on, but obviously cricket clubs are communities, so keeping in touch with people, keeping fit and active, and encouraging people to stay in touch during this period is obviously key as well. And then hopefully when we're back out and active, we'll still keep that community closely together. So reducing expenditure is obviously a key step at this stage. The first area of support I wanted to touch upon is exploring government support. There's two schemes available to many clubs. through their roles as businesses. So there's a 10k grant available to businesses with a rateable value of under 15k. That covers retail, leisure and hospitality businesses, of which sports clubs fall within. So checking your rateable value and talking to your local authority, that fund has helped a number of clubs nationally that are under 15k in terms of their rateable value. And then there's a more sizable scheme for larger businesses that are rateable value between 15 and 51k, and they've been able to obtain 25k grants. And whilst this is meant to be automatically allocated by your local authority, there's certainly no harm in being proactive and checking your status and following up directly with them. Some authorities have done it straight away, others have required application forms and so on. So I'd advise that you follow that up if you haven't already. In terms of other grants and fundraising opportunities, Sport England have their Community Emergency Fund, which is providing between 300 and 10k grants to sports organisations. We've seen a lot of clubs successful with this nationally, which is excellent. Around 500 clubs have been successful, typically have been able to obtain a grant of around 3k for their clubs. This is obviously a very popular scheme, so I would advise to apply to that if you haven't already as soon as possible, because there's 20 million allocated to all sports, and ultimately it will dry up at some stage, so certainly look into that one. There's also a very good website called Grants Online, where you can look at other grants that you may qualify for depending on your status. The CSP will have some guidance around that. And we've also seen some great examples of clubs doing some great fundraising activities. So setting up GoFundMe pages and Just Giving. I think we've got an example here from Long Parish Cricket Club, which is great in terms of getting some donations in to help the club during the short term. We've also seen clubs running quiz nights. I think there's one here, Bashley Cricket Club, have been doing that, which is great. We've also seen clubs running some virtual race nights, as well as bringing the community together and raising some funding during this difficult period of time as well. And I think Simon's going to talk a little bit more around cask status. Just to clarify, if clubs are a cask, they should qualify for the government support I touched on. If they've got a rateable value, that is essentially what matters for that. So if you're a cask, you can look at that. But I think Simon's going to talk a little bit more about casks later on as well. So yeah, that's reducing expenditure and the more general funding support schemes. So Si, if you just move on to the next slide, please. So it's just a quick breakdown of, as I said, the government support, which is allocated locally by your local councils. So there's a PDF link at the top there where you can look into this, and the contact details for your relevant local councils. So as I said, certainly follow that up if you haven't already and check your status and if you're eligible for that 10k grant. Just a couple of quick FAQs regarding Sport England and government support. Certain clubs have been successful with Sport England and then had their government 10k come through, and there was a question mark around whether they should send back one of those grants. Clubs will still qualify for local authority support if they've obtained Sport England grant, but it's obviously a decision for the club to make. It's a sort of responsible decision. So, you know, if a club, for example, has obtained 10k from the government and 10k from Sport England, but doesn't need that full amount, then we'd advise they make a responsible decision on potentially handing back that grant, which some clubs have. Some of the clubs that are more financially at risk, or larger clubs, have retained both. So essentially it's a decision for the club to make, but we advocate making a responsible decision with that one. And likewise, clubs that have obtained the government grants can still go to Sport England if they still have a financial challenge. So essentially the two funds can work together, and it's all about assessing case by case on your individual club's challenges. So yeah, so that's the background on the government and Sport England schemes. Now move on to the ECB schemes that are available for clubs. The first one is the ECB's emergency loan scheme. This is to support clubs with funding shortfalls in their essential day-to-day running and maintenance costs. It's to cover costs. It's not to be used to replace surplus income foregone in year. So essentially it won't cover cancelled events, fundraisers, that sort of thing you weren't able to run, unfortunately, this year, but it will cover your fixed costs. I won't talk through all of these, but some of the key ones, things like your utility bills, rental costs, insurance, the fixed costs that you're still liable for, whether or not you're able to play cricket. We will look at any other reasonable costs as well. So include all those in any application you're taking forward. So in terms of how much clubs can apply for through this scheme, clubs have a junior section between 1 and 5k, adult only clubs between 1 and 3k. All of the loans are interest free. We've announced an automatic payment holiday, so no repayments will need to be made until May 2021. to ease the short-term situation. It's a 3-year repayment period. The application process is through the IMS website, which is ims.ecb.co.uk. Clubs just simply need to register a login and 2 contacts for that, and then complete a short online application form with some basic documentation, and that's then processed by our investment team. And we've already had examples of clubs that have had their payment and had their contracts issued. So quick turnarounds, hopefully a fairly straightforward application process. There's also a help desk available if necessary for the loan scheme. So if we just move on to the next one, please. Okay, so the second one is our Return to Cricket Grant Scheme, and this is for clubs most at severe risks that have really difficult financial situations, and with expectation that clubs would have looked at all other areas of financial support, so the government support, Sport England, and also assess whether they're able to apply for the loan scheme that we've just talked about. The types of clubs that may come forward for this are those that are prevented from taking loans constitutionally, of which there are many out there. Clubs that have an annual turnover under 15k, and this criteria is to try and ensure this funding goes to clubs most at need. Larger clubs tend to be able to access higher levels of government support and Sport England support, so we're trying to ensure this limited grant funding goes to the clubs most at need. But if you do have a particularly challenging individual club situation, then certainly notify Hampshire about that, and we'll do everything we can to support you. Cricket leagues can also apply to this grant scheme as well, so open age junior leagues are eligible to apply to this grant fund. In terms of costs, it's the same as the emergency loan. It's those fixed costs such as rent, insurance, and other fixed costs. The amount that clubs can apply for, junior sections can apply for up to 3k, adult only clubs up to 1k, and cricket leagues up to 2k. So in terms of an application system, in first instance is to contact Hampshire, discuss your application with them and your individual club situation, and then if successful, that'll be referred to myself for further assessment. So yeah, first thing to do is to look through all the funding sources that are out there, assess your individual club situation, and have a conversation with Hampshire in first instance. Okay, just move on to the final one, please, Sam. So this is an emergency loan scheme that's been developed for leagues, which goes live tomorrow. So it's a bit of a sneak preview of this one. The aim for this one is to support cricket leagues by providing funding to cover the cost of cricket balls, in particular, that were purchased for the 2020 season, which is obviously a substantial cost. And it will also support unrecoverable costs above 2k, so fixture cards, pitch hire, other equipment costs, things of that nature. So in terms of leagues that are eligible for this, it's those that are affiliated with a county cricket board, either last year or this year, or those that affiliate directly to a national body, whether that's ourselves or other organisations such as NACC. In terms of the amounts leagues can apply for, that's up to 50k, and again, all loans will be interest free. The application process, same as the club emergency loan scheme, that's through the IMS system, and then your application will be validated either through Hampshire locally or through ECB if it's a regional or national league. So I think that's all for the emergency schemes. Just to summarise, Simon, if you just click through to the final slide.
Just working my way through, Duncan. Got a bit of a bad network. Perfect.
That's all right. I'll talk you through. Hopefully the slides will catch me up. So just to recap. So as a summary, reducing your expenditure, exploring government and Sport England support in the first instance, seeking other grants that might be available locally, and carrying out those fundraising activities that I mentioned, such as quizzes, race nights and so on, and launching those Just Giving pages is obviously key. And then in terms of ECB support that's available, we have our emergency loan scheme for clubs. We have the Return to Cricket Grant Scheme for the clubs most at risk and leagues as well. And then finally, we have the new ECB emergency loan scheme, which will be launched nationally tomorrow. And that's all from me. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Duncan. Simon, we'll move swiftly on to you if we can, please.
Okay, well, I'll try and move the presentation swiftly on. Had absolutely fantastic signal until it was my turn to speak. Just a reminder that in the chat box on the right-hand side, if you can get your questions coming in, Ben will see those and we will come to them. So just bear with me a second. Yeah, well, that's me. I know who I am. You know who I am. I look after clubs and leagues in Hampshire. While we've got slides working, I shall go swiftly on to the next one, and really to talk about the picture in Hampshire at the moment. Very kindly, I'll go on to talk about the survey that clubs have filled out. We've had over 100 replies already since it went out on Friday night. But clubs, you've told us that there have been 24 government small business grants awarded, and that's in 6 of the 14 local authorities, including the Isle of Wight. We do want to hear from you if you have tried to apply and had a knockback, because it's a national scheme that local authorities should be applying consistency. So we want to hear about your successes. We want to hear about the challenges, the issues that you may have received as well, because as you'll see there, over half the local authorities, as far as we know, haven't made any awards yet, and really that's the first port of call. In addition, we've learned of 13 Sport England Community Emergency Fund grants as well, awarded to clubs affiliating to Hampshire Cricket Board. As Duncan said earlier, wanted to talk about Community Amateur Sports Club status, CASCs for short. We have 156 clubs affiliating to us in Hampshire. 45 of them are registered with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs as Community Amateur Sports Clubs. Now, while it's not going to be appropriate for everyone, such as companies that are constituted as limited companies, most clubs are what are called unincorporated associations. So if correctly constituted, like a lot of the club community amateur sports clubs, they're eligible to register this status with HMRC, which confers certain benefits, which includes access to gift aid. The reason I'm stressing this is that there's 2 good sources of information to look at. First of all, the England and Wales Cricket Board website. Secondly, that link on the gov.uk website. You'll be receiving this presentation afterwards, and that shows some of the areas such as small cash donations and individual donations, which the gift aid can be claimed back, because I think we're in an age of making less have to go further, maybe for the next few months or maybe even longer. So if there are instances where you can make the money you have got or the money that you are going to receive go further, this is certainly something to look at. Now, the advice is there. It's probably something that you're going to need someone in your club with a bit of a financial background to look at to make sure it's the right choice for you. But there is certainly scope for the additional, say, 110 or so clubs to take a look at that. We'll give you our contact details at the end, so by all means do have a look through the presentations. Come to us with any queries that we can't, we will field to the appropriate people, which is probably going to be Revenue and Customs. But do take a look. I would encourage you to look at that. I think it's something that clubs are going to need to make best use of. This is also a message for the 45 clubs, and that's a hyperlink there. They are listed on our website, who are registered as community amateur sports clubs. Again, do take a look at the material, because there could be better use you're making of this status. So that's one area to look at. The next area to go into, what are we doing locally in terms of communication and support? Well, in the past week, we've had the first of what's going to be a series of video conference calls with the adult leagues and the junior leagues, possibly the same plan for indoor leagues going forward, because if we get to a situation, the less cricket we have, the more importance indoor cricket assumes as well. So rest assured that we are talking to leagues on an ongoing basis and attempting to get everything coordinated so that there's something seamless and consistent and easy to understand for clubs, because we appreciate that both clubs and leagues have got enough going on at the moment in this uncertain climate. We've started a series of web pages. All the links are there, and I'm glad to say that of the over 100 clubs who've replied to the survey, about 95% had seen the pages and were aware of them. So we don't want to bombard you with masses of emails because you'll stop reading them and miss something important. So we don't send out an update every time we get a bit of information through. We're doing this on a weekly basis, on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. That synchronises nicely with ECB's timescales of the sort of the regional and national meetings they have and when news comes out. We integrate any ECB updates into those pages. So there's a general update and advice, a particular page on safeguarding, page on staying active, which we've had some absolutely fantastic contributions from clubs up and down the county. Coach Ryan Beck at New Milton in particular, and Andy Weeble with golf trick shots at Grey Shot is keeping everyone happy and active. We are now 8 editions into the Umpire Strikes Back podcast. We've had guests such as James Tomlinson, Charlotte Edwards, and Adi Birrell, the Hampshire coach. Paul Hawkins, the Hawkeye inventor, is going to be on the next one coming out on Friday, and Simon Lee, the Hampshire groundsman. So we'll keep that advice coming out for clubs through that podcast. You can access that from our website. And of course, very importantly, the financial support for clubs and organisations page, which will have everything about essentially which Duncan has just gone through. A couple of local things to highlight just to finish this, the penultimate page. One of the main insurers, probably I think they've got about 2/3 of the market in Hampshire, Finch, both ourselves and the league, mainly ourselves, spoke to the Southampton branch manager who looks after the cricket accounts, and they have managed to secure a reduction in premiums and the option of instalments, which arrived in time for some, but not necessarily in time for everyone who paid up front. You might need to contact insurers if you want to sort of revisit that. And again, for the Southern Premier League clubs, about 40 or so teams, 30 odd clubs, they have made their development fund available to clubs just by application to Steve Veer, the chairman. So please bear those in mind. Let's just move on to the next slide. Okay. So just a final call. Thank you, first of all, for the over 100 responses for the survey, which is going to give us a lot of good information about what you're doing at the moment. Again, we don't want to come out to you too often on this. And as I said, same with the emails. If anything urgent comes out, we'll probably still just keep to weekly emails and get information out to you via our social media channels, details of which will follow. But if we can get probably, we've got 100 survey responses, which probably leaves about another 60 or 70 clubs. We want to get the whole picture. It covers the facility side of things, how available are our facilities currently to maintain, how quickly, if the government said we could start playing cricket tomorrow, how long would it take for the facilities to be ready, and the particular emphasis on what local authority and contractors are doing, because obviously some of their staff may be furloughed or transferred to other activities. So our indication so far is that at about a quarter of facilities may not being maintained at the moment, but we're going to go into that more deeply once all the replies come in. We've asked about the financial side, what has been successful, what hasn't, hence the information about the 24 government grants and the 13 Sport England grants, and they're coming in and updating all the time. Finally, we asked about playing, so that'll be good information to get back on our next call with the senior leagues and the junior leagues to get some really good intelligence from you with a feel that what you want to do. Essentially, the season is probably going to be divided up into the possibility of getting about a half a season in or something at the end, or the worst case scenario, sort of none at all. So what we're going to work through is the playing and financial implications with the league, and again try and get something coherent and consistent out to you on that. So thank you to those who completed that. If those who are yet to can please do that by 9 AM on Friday, then the team, I was going to say back at the office, but we're all back at home. The team in our virtual offices will then get to work at looking at the replies. It may take a bit of a while because some of them are text replies, but we want to go quite deeply into this and get the best possible information out of it and the best thing, and we will then report back to you. Okay. Let's So I think that's it from me. But I imagine that last 30 minutes may have prompted one or two questions, so I'll hand back to Ben.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Duncan. Yes, it has prompted a few questions. I see Duncan has been replying to some of them. Thanks, Duncan. I will read some of them out because I think a number of them are relevant to everybody. So the first one that came in is asking why ECB is the funder of last resort in this case. Duncan, are you able just to share your response, please?
Yeah, since it disappeared from my screen. I mean, essentially, we don't have unlimited resource like all businesses. It's extremely challenging when there's no income into the game. We've directed £20 million into these loan and grant schemes, but we also have 4,000 clubs we're trying to support. So clearly we need to direct that to the clubs most at risk, most having challenging financial positions. So as well as our grant and loan support, clearly the government support and Sport England support that's available is fundamental to help clubs during this difficult time. So yes, that's essentially, we do have this support available for clubs, but it won't solve everything, and we're doing our best to assist during this challenging period.
Excellent, thank you, Duncan. Another one asking if clubs have received a government grant, can they apply for any other funding? And a question linked to that is also, if clubs have been prudent in the past and already have sufficient funds, can they still apply for any of this funding, ECB or otherwise?
Yes, so essentially I would say it's case by case. So if a club can meet its short-term obligations simply through the government 10K, then that's great. But if there's a greater financial challenge, then certainly I would suggest applying to the Sport England Fund as well. If a club's been prudent, then that's great. I would advocate constantly reviewing the financial position. I think clearly for some clubs, if we're on lockdown for an extended period of time, financial pressures may increase. The loan scheme is a rolling scheme, so will be available later in the summer as well as immediately. So whilst we are directing to clubs most at risk, it's simply a case of keeping an eye on those finances and, as I said, reducing expenditure. Because we need to make sure they go to the clubs most at risk at this stage. So just keep in touch with Hampshire, I would say, and review your situation locally.
Excellent, thanks again, Duncan. There's a couple of other ones coming in. One common one asking if the slides will be available after this call, and yes, they certainly will be, together with the recording. So we'll make sure we put that on our website, probably be put on our FAQ page, but yes, that will be slides available and a copy of this of the presentations and speakers. Not much sure. We've had a couple of people indicate where they have been successful in receiving grants from local authority. They include Test Valley, Gosport, Winchester. Just for those clubs that are on from the Winchester area, I think it's a case of needing to be proactive there. One club that wrote in and said that they did need to make contact even though they were eligible. So if you think you're eligible and haven't been contacted, then obviously please make contact with them. A few more questions now coming in. Bear with me.
Just to say, that's quite good news. That's a couple of extra local authorities who have approved grants. So that's up to 8 out of the 13 now.
Okay, excellent. Simon from Hook has asked, does the club need to have cask status to get the business grant from local authorities? No, they don't. It's based on the rate relief. So if you look up, I've just put a link on the Q&A. I'll share it with Hampshire if they haven't already shared it with you. There's basically a postcode search. If you go on the government website, you can look for the club's rate relief by putting in the postcode, and you'll see if the club's on there and what their rateable value is. Under 15k, you can apply for up to 10k support through the government. If it's between 15 and 51, then 25k grant from the government. And that postcode finder on our website. I think one thing to say is there is a distinction here between having a rateable value and paying rates. For my past in the civil service, working for the valuation office,
virtually every property has a rateable value, but clubs are able, amateur sports clubs and voluntary organisations are able to apply to have either 80% rebated of that, and the final 20% might be rebated at the discretion of the local authority, i.e. you don't have to pay. So just because you don't pay rates doesn't mean to say you have a rateable value. If you have a rateable value, you should be eligible under the terms of the scheme.
Excellent, thank you, Si. I'm just scrolling through. There's one from Steve Ayres at Stratfield Turgis. Sport England CEF covers costs to end of July. If no cricket is possible this season, do you know if CEF will consider grant applications for the remainder of the season beyond July? I'm not sure if we know that one, Duncan or Si.
No, that remains to be seen. So at the moment, they've allocated 20 million to the scheme, and that's been extremely popular. I think they're wrestling with 7,000 applications across sport. So yeah, it remains to be seen if they'll extend that, put more funding into it. But obviously, as soon as we know that, we'll communicate.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Sorry, just one on our survey for Friday. Says, appreciate that you want to get the survey completed on Friday, but can you share what the current trend is from clubs around their expectation for any cricket this summer, and if they will be able to raise a team? I'm not sure if we can answer that one. Might be one to follow up afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's one that is probably one of the text answers. So we've probably got 100 text answers to go through for maybe a couple of questions that cover that. So we will aim to publish this as swiftly as possible, and in the actual programme does some nice sort of pie charts rather than us going on forever and doing paragraphs and paragraphs about it. So we will aim to get something out as quickly as we can to you once everyone's had a chance to reply and in a palatable form.
Okay, thank you, Si. One for Duncan again. Duncan, just around with current loans, etc., are there likely to be less grants available in the future for club improvements, facilities and development of women's cricket?
So at the moment, we still have the interest-free loan scheme available for clubs. That's for capital investment projects, and that's up to 50k for clubs of junior sections. So that scheme is unaffected. Grants currently on hold. Clearly, we're directing funding to these emergency loan and grant schemes. Ultimately, we'd like to have them back on track. They were going to launch a month ago, but clearly we've had to put those back while we deal with the emergency situation. So for now, we have the interest-free loan scheme and the emergency schemes, but we don't have any grant funding, I'm afraid, other than those.
Excellent, thank you, Duncan. Another question asking for a list of a list of councils that have paid out the rates in the grant scheme. I think there's a query over Portsmouth. Yes, Simon's collating that. I think I'm right in saying, Si, at the moment, and hence the questionnaire that's out. And we can be proactive then for those that aren't having so much luck, and we will certainly be in touch. But we'll be looking to publish that certainly.
And that's on one of the slides
so far, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, you've muted, Si.
Sorry, yep. So yes, pardon me. Yes, that is, so with the extra 2 today, that's 8 out of 13. That is in the slides as well, and then we will further update that with the survey. But 8 out of 14 is a good start.
Excellent, thank you, Si. Okay, I think as far as I can see, that is most of the questions. There's a lot of questions coming in, so apologies if I have missed any. Oh, we've just had one more in. So if a club rents a premises and rates not on invoice, to be clear, we cannot get any relief RE rateable value. Is that correct? If I've read that out correctly, Duncan or Si?
Yeah, I think I'll have to look into that in a bit more detail. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
okay.
offhand. Yeah, if you want to get in touch directly, we can have a look at that one.
Yeah, that's currently an anonymous question. So if you want to put another one in, whoever wrote that, that would be great. We can follow that up afterwards.
If you want to email maybe hgbadmin@geospol.com and we'll pick that up from there.
Excellent. Okay, I'm just conscious of time, but one last one has just come in, and it's asking whether the grant for machinery and equipment is still running or will be running.
I think that finished in about 2010.
Some time ago.
Yeah, you can still apply for the loan support for machinery, so that scheme remains available. That's an interest-free loan.
Excellent. Okay, just conscious of time, but that's brilliant. Thank you very much for all your questions that came in there. As I say, hopefully we answered the vast majority of them. If I have missed any, then as Si just indicated, please email them to the hcb.admin email address, and we'll do our best to come back to you. Hope you found all of the presentations useful. Please, as I said right at the start, please provide feedback on how we've communicated tonight. As I say, it is our first attempt at this, so apologies for the initial technical problem at the start, which delayed matters slightly. But please come back to us with any feedback, good or bad, and we'll see how we take the things forward. I'd like to thank obviously Si and Duncan for doing the hard work. Thank you very much for preparing the presentations. Really useful. And lastly, thank you to everybody for dialing in this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay safe.